when I got the draft notice, I had numerous friends that had also avoided the draft one way or another. And in Southern California, there was certainly a very large contingent of people that were protesting the war at that time. And so I was getting a lot of advice on how to avoid the draft. But I'd already had some high school friends that had been killed from Missouri. And I just did not feel comfortable. I just kind of felt it was my duty to take my turn. Towards the end of flight school, they gave you a wish list, and you could sign up what you wanted to fly next or go to, what kind of school you wanted to go to next. And I listed a medevac first, and then Chinooks, and then Cobras, and I got Cobras.
What was the first thing you heard, saw, experienced in South Vietnam that drove home the point to you that you were in a war zone?
One kind of this is very minor.
Mm.
The morning when we were leaving on K, a real small airport terminal, early in the morning, and we all had our new gear. I had a brand new M14, and the seats in the terminal were like church pews, wooden church pews. And I laid down, and I think a couple of us took a nap. And I'm laying down, and when I woke up, I don't know how long I slept, but no more than an hour. My M14 was gone.
Oh,
So that was a little bit discouraging and frightening in some respects.
I wonder if you could describe, what is the basic mission of the Cobra in
Okay.
Western Three Corps?
The primary mission was supporting the lift ships into LZs. So when LZ was identified for an aviation assault, aviation company, infantry company assault, it was our job to support them going into that particular LZ. We did many other missions also, but that was the primary mission.
And by support, does that mean, so you've got troops on Hueys, I imagine, they're going in they're being inserted. We think there might be some VC over in this area, so your job with the Cobra would be to hit that area to prevent them from hitting the guys who are.
Usually what would happen when there was a LZ that was identified, prior to this, usually they'd be out with a command and control, with usually a senior officer, like a lieutenant colonel or someone, would be going out. And of course, they knew where the hot spots were. And they would then fly over a day or so previous to try to identify a landing area. Once a landing area was selected that they felt would be tactically important based upon where the enemy were, well, then just prior to our insertion, and it could be sometimes only one helicopter landing area. Those were more unusual. It was quite common to have an area big enough you could put 3 aircraft in, sometimes even more. And usually if there was a big formation, sometimes a dozen or more aircraft. Well, if it was only a 3 helicopter LZ, you'd escort 3 down, escort them out, go up and grab 3 more and bring them down. So what they would do, and then say it was a really big situation. Sometimes there would be a B-52 strike a few hours before, and then towards the time for the insertion, there would be an artillery strike.
Okay, yeah.
Now, the artillery strike and the whole approach to landing in this LZ was based upon the very end of the artillery strike. So that means hopefully that any NVA or VC that were surrounding the LZ nearby or wherever, their heads would still be down, so to speak. And then the very last round that came out of the artillery battery was white phosphorus. which was very identifiable when it would land in the LZ area. So that Chalk 1, that was usually the leader of the Hueys, that was his signal that he knew, cross your fingers, that's the last round out of the artillery battery. And he was probably at that point just short of breaking over the tree line. And so then you go in. So then sometimes even prior to that, they would even have Blue Max come in and pepper the tree line with arrow or rockets. But then what we would do, just as that lead Huey is breaking the tree line, we always had a wingman, two Cobras working together. So the first Cobra would go in and he'd fly around the tree line with both minigun and rockets. And maybe just before we'd shoot some rockets, then as we started curving around, we would be firing the miniguns. So almost all of our aircraft had miniguns on the wings, one each, and then minigun in the turret. So we'd fly around, and then about the time we got a little over halfway around, our wingman would pick up and do the same thing. By that time, the first Hueys are probably, by the time we get 180 degrees, first Huey's probably just touching down. And so then we would just circle unless they started taking fire, and then we'd try to suppress that fire.
And you go.
And then we'd kind of pull back like this and escort them out as they were taking off. So if they were taking fire from one side or another, we could hopefully suppress that fire. It was a night mission where we used a starlight scope and where you accompany a Huey that is flying around at an altitude that they can use a starlight scope to identify possibly anything interesting on the ground. And so this was late, I don't think it was after midnight, but it was getting pretty late in the evening. And we hadn't been on the mission very long, and it was north of Dao Tiang. It was up near the Cambodian border. So our job was, if they did find anything interesting that they could identify as being enemy, or if they even got fired at, it was our job to suppress that fire. The aircraft, the Huey, and I don't remember for sure if there was only one or two Hueys. And so everybody had different altitudes. So you did, and lights out. So very strict altitude separation, so you didn't have to worry about running into folks. And we were, I believe, the lowest aircraft. So we were probably, my guess is, about 1,500 feet or so. And all of a sudden, get a warning light, and then real close inspection shows that we lost transmission oil pressure. And transmission operating properly on a helicopter is a pretty important thing. And so I was flying with Pat Carey. He was the aircraft commander. I was up front. And so immediately he lowers the collective and we start going towards the ground. It was a moonlit night. And that's one of the starlight scope makes that starlight scope pretty effective under those conditions. And starlight scope was obviously being operated by in one of the Hueys, or maybe only the one Huey. So we saw a road that was I don't know if it was paved, but it might have been oiled, so it reflected in the moonlight pretty well. And so I remember we kind of came down and kind of made a left-hand turn, and then almost like we were on downwind, base leg, and a left-hand turn, and lined up with this road. And we were probably down, I know we were already slowing down in a little decel, and probably, certainly less, I would guess less than 500 feet, if not 300 feet. And that is concentrating on the road. And this happened to look out over here at a little hilltop, at most half mile or less away. And maybe only a quarter mile anyway. And obviously it was a camp. on the top of this hill. It was Special Forces camp. Sorry, Pat, you know. So he immediately turns the aircraft and we go over there and we make one circle around and it's one of those triangular bases, and which maybe it's not a Special Forces camp, but a MACV camp, because we're kind of around and there was from the road that we were on, there's a road that kind of went up this hill. And so we landed on the entrance side, the long flat side, and we sat down, and the heel of the right skid was, it's interesting how some things are concrete in your mind, was missed setting down on top of the Claymore mine, probably by 1 foot.
Oh, wow.
Now, supposedly they're only supposed to go off if they're detonated, but I wouldn't want to try to prove that. So by now the aircraft was all the way down. I had one of the old olive drab flashlights, Steve batteries, that had a right angle lens on it. And because we turned the instruments all the way down, once we had the instruments down anyway for the mission, but then we needed to be able to look outside quite well. So the instruments all the way down, and so I just kept looking at the oil pressure and oil temperature and reading them off to Pat. And so when we sat down, usually when the aircraft sits down, the blade, because they don't have rotor brakes on the aircraft, and it sits there and usually spins for a while as it spools down. Well, this thing didn't spool down very long, but they came to a stop, and it was making noise. So we climbed out, and a number of Vietnamese come out, and only 2 Americans. So that's why I think it was a MACV camp, and indigenous Vietnamese. So there may have been a lot of more Montagnards than Arvin type Vietnamese. So then we realized that the Huey didn't know where we were because we all had lights out. So I climbed back in the aircraft, turned the rotating beacon on, and got on the radio asking if they could see us, and they said they could see us. So they came down just within a minute or two and picked us up, and then flew us back to Dao Tiang. And the whole floor was covered with flare tubes, so obviously which were never used. And so we flew back to Dao Tiang sitting on top of the flares. And then the other mission, which I don't remember nearly as well, but I believe it was the night of the 22nd, 23rd February. And it was an attack on LZ Grant, which was roughly halfway between Daoting and Tainan, a little bit north of that line, and maybe about 3 miles, actually probably about 4 miles northeast of Nui Ba Din, the big mountain in western Three Corps. And it was a night mission, and they were being attacked. And we had been deployed to Tainan for the night because there was a lot of rumors. This is often referred to as the post-Tet Battle of '69. So anyway, we got assigned to go over and do support and cover for the LZ Grant that was being assaulted. And the thing of probably, other than making a number of gun runs, we expended all of our ammunition, both rockets and pretty much miniguns also. We do have a 40 Mike grenade launcher, but it's not really very effective, I think, for night missions. It's more effective for close-in work at lower altitudes. But what stands out in my mind was the fire that we were taking, and tracers from the enemy guns, including 50 caliber and 30 caliber. And with 30 caliber coming at the tracer, and I forget how many rounds are in between each tracer round, but let's say 4, 5, 6, whatever. But when that tracer's coming at you, it looks kind of like a softball. But when a 50 caliber is coming at you, it looks like a basketball.
Wow. Yeah.
just the glow, that's around it, and so that stood out.
Let me ask you about that, because I've talked to enough veterans by now, that what I hear is that when you're in a combat situation, you're not thinking deep thoughts. It's almost like training takes over. And, if you ask the veteran, what were you thinking? A lot of times they're saying you're not thinking anything. You almost get into a robotic state. But I'm always amazed when I, hear from veterans who are operating these very complicated machines, who are focused on what they're doing, which is defending our guys. But at the same time, you've got these, basketball size lights coming at you, which are the enemy tracers. And I'm just wondering, how would you describe, and I understand it's not really possible to describe this probably, to someone who's never experienced it, but to the extent you can, how would you describe the state of mind of a guy who, is in his early 20s, flying a complicated machine, in an incredibly intense situation where you've got people on the ground who are shooting at you because you can see the tracers coming up at you. So you're not thinking deep thoughts, but what is your state of mind? What's going on?
I think it's total concentration on the job at hand. It's very, very, high stress without a doubt, but total concentration on the job. And it's not till after we got back home do you really start thinking about all that stuff and possibly describing it to your peers, back at the base. Uh, just fixation on the job at hand. Yeah. And also, I've been in situations prior to that at night where we're being shot at, and to the point I almost came to that I would rather fly at night and know that I was being shot at and from where I was being shot at than in the daytime where you had no clue.
Wow.
Until it hit you.
Were you able to hear when projectiles would hit the helicopter? Were you able to hear it?
No. Oh, and I was never in the helicopter other than when I got wounded that actually got hit. A lot of the fellows would talk about, they could tell when the aircraft took a slug in the side or something like that.
When you are engaging the enemy, I imagine a lot of time, you're, especially at night, you see the tracers and so you know where to fire, or you have other information. Maybe you can see, the smoke from the ammunition that's been expended, and so that's where to fire. Were there times when you actually saw the enemy themselves on the ground? You knew you saw the NVA, you saw the VC on the ground, or was that pretty rare?
That was very rare. And I can think only one time, early one morning. And this particularly stands out for one reason, because it was one of those mornings when it was not quite foggy, but a lot of moisture in the air. And we came up on this way out in the middle of nowhere, a hooch or shack. And talking with our command and control, they said there was enemy in this area and this was a suspicious hooch. And then I can remember as we kind of circled it, you could see this little, you've probably seen pictures of, or been there in an airport as you watch airplanes land and you see the vapor coming off the wingtips.
Mm.
And I can remember just as we circled it, watching this little vapor coming off the end of the rotor blades. It's just kind of like a peaceful thing to observe. And then we saw people running away from the hooch. And again, we were told to engage them. And so we fired a couple rockets at least and a bunch of minigun. Yeah. So again, a lot of the times those things I I don't know, sometimes those people could have been, I mean, not necessarily enemy, you know, it's hard to say. Some of those things bother me. Yeah,
Mm. Right, because it just the challenge of with the Viet Cong just not being able to know who is and who isn't.
right. Another type of mission that we did on a number of occasions was we would, the little Loach, the Loach 6A, they would, and this would be out west of Dao Tiang, nearer to Tain An, and the Loach would come up on a village, and they would circle, and then sometimes they would land, and they were looking for military age personnel or people, citizens, whatever, and sometimes if they found someone that was suspicious, there was also a Huey that was accompanying us in this mission, would then land and pick up these people. Um, we never had any engagement during this, but we did this a few times, and I could very well see how in other situations I've heard that their engagements took place during this. And so we were there just to cover both aircraft in case something did start to happen. You know, we paid attention to what was taking place, what was in the news. Of course, 68 was a big year politically, protest wise. And I felt, and I think most of my peers felt, that the war was being prosecuted ineptly um, on in many areas, um, and the whole it was an impossible war in many ways with the Ho Chi Minh Trail and having a sanctuary in Laos and Cambodia, and then we're not really being able to do much about it other than harassment. I mean, there were a lot of missions, but essentially it just boiled down to harassment of the NVA.
Now you're pretty close to Cambodia, I think.
Yeah,
Were you at this time in '69? And of course, the Ho Chi Minh Trail is coming down Cambodia.
right.
You talk to vets from 1964, well, 1965, and they're doing operations over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. Here we are in '69, still talking about the Ho Chi Minh Trail. You talk
Oh
to
yeah,
guys in 1971, still talking about the Ho Chi Minh Trail.
and now the Ho Chi Minh Trail is much more developed.
Right. And so in '69, were you able to, to go into Cambodia and to do what you could against the trail and the NVA
No,
there?
no, um, we didn't do anything of that nature. Um, there was um, one of our Cobras, and Bill McQuaid and Dudley Hale were assigned to take one of our company aircraft to a special forces camp further north along the Cambodian border. And their job, so the special forces camp, they were doing stuff which is sometimes called over the fence.
Right.
Um, and then the purpose for aircraft just basing there for a short while was no more than a week of that. Was to support these guys as they did some harassment missions over the fence. But um, I don't remember much specific about it, but we did not. So if I was ever into Cambodia, it was purely by mistake during the night or whatever. Yeah.
Do you recall, in the officers club or in other places, having these discussions with other pilots, that, we're going out there pretty much every day and getting into rough situations. And we know that the enemy they're using Cambodia
Right.
to get stuff, but at the time we're here, we can't really do anything about it.
That's correct.
Do you remember having those kinds of conversations with others?
I don't remember a specific conversation. I do remember it's something that we often lamented that it's crazy. You know, you just kind of go, it's crazy. 2 weeks after that first battle of LZ Grant that I mentioned to you, the 22nd and 23rd, there was another attack on LZ Grant the night of the 7th and 8th of March. And the next morning, a lot of times after these battles, immediately following the battle, they would organize, the Americans would organize what's called a sweep. So what I do, you do inserts on the retreating side of the battle where the NVA or VC would retreat from. And so there was a number of operations planned for the next morning, including arc lights, a lot of artillery strikes. And so we started in the morning picking up a bunch of troops out of LZ Dolly, which was on the Razorbacks, just a few miles north of Daotiang. You can see it, you know, it's little mountains up there. And so we picked up, I remember we picked up 3 ships at a time, 4 times. So I think we had a dozen aircraft with us. And so then we flew west, just west of LZ Grant, and did the insert. I don't remember much about that LZ other than we got everybody down and out. And then we went to another base, which was north of New Badin, which I think was LZ Barbara, and picked up another lift of at least a dozen Hueys. And then flew to another LZ, which was just north, probably no more than a mile or 2 north of LZ Grant. And again, the same little thing, there had been an artillery strike and that kind of stuff ahead of time. And we took down 6 ships. And as they were taking off, they started yelling and on the radio, you know, we're taking fire, taking fire. And so they were climbing out, and I do remember saying, you know, nobody was hit, everybody was fine. And so then aircraft I was in our wingman. Then now it was a big open field. There were no real major tree line. And to the axis that we were working on was kind of southwest to northeast. And there was a creek that ran northwest and southeast. And then there was on the far side of the creek was almost like a cliff, embankments. And so there was bunkers, NVA bunkers in this cliff line. And they had all the troops that we just put on the ground pinned down. So they were yelling, they, you know, wanted support. So they would try to give us directions roughly where the bunkers were. So we would make a gun run and then break, and then the wingman would start from a higher altitude, make a gun run and break, then you'd come around and regroup and do the same thing. So each time the troops on the ground would, you know, try to adjust our fire via the radio. And then on the 4th run, as soon as we went down, as soon as we broke, or shortly after we got 90 degrees to the axis, round came through, I don't really know, but yay far below the canopy on the right-hand side, hit me, took my jaw off, and went up the canopy up here. And so immediately I thought that we got hit and we exploded. I just had this red maze vision and a tumbling sensation. And then as my vision cleared, a number of things at once, I could see looking at the instruments that we were still right side up and flying. And I could hear Dick yelling, "Rich, Rich, Rich." And at the same time, I could hear on our radio, Tiger 3/8's hit, Tiger 3/8's hit. So that all kind of merges into my memory. And so he immediately started flying us towards the hospital in Tay Ninh. And we were down skimming along the ground, probably only 100 feet or so, because fastest I'd ever been straight and level in a Cobra. So we did not know where the hospital was in St. Anne. We'd been to the airport many times. We didn't know where the hospital was, which was not too far actually from the actual airstrip. But our previous company commander, Gary Lobin, was now the battalion safety officer. So he was in St. Anne and he was on a radio and telling us how to get into town and what street to fly down, that sort of stuff. And uh, and I remember looking at, we had this little mirror. And so a lot of times I could look in the mirror and I could see him. He could see me through the mirror. And I kind of tilted the mirror and I looked at it and I said, I remember this very vividly. I said, well, looks like you're going to live, but it's going to be a bitch.
What was the nature of the wound?
A 50 caliber round just blew my jaw.
Holy cow.
Um, and anyway, so
Now, were you in, so how would you describe, I mean, your own state of mind, you know, at this point, you know something happened, you look at yourself in the mirror, are you in a kind of shock? Are you just
well,
focused on
no,
getting
no,
this thing on the ground?
I'm obviously probably in shock. Um, and as we flew along, um, I became, it couldn't have been much more than a 10-minute flight, certainly no more than a 15-minute flight. And as we flew along, I became more and more concerned. I was having a hard time breathing. If I had been knocked out, I would have probably have strangled. Uh, I've had buddies that I then met in the hospital later on uh, that didn't have nearly as obviously they didn't lose as much jaw as I did. That did get knocked out, or don't remember anything about it anyway. Um, so I do remember at one point I was starting to get frantic, and all the aircraft have floor mics. It's like the old dimmer switch we used to have in a car on the floor. And I was just out of being frantic. I started tapping on it. I remember Dick yelling at me, "Get the fuck off the floor mic," because it was interrupting his ability, to communicate. And it was out of just pure frustration and now getting a little bit frantic about finally getting to the hospital. Um, I I only remember one thing en route that is visually. As we were flying by Neuilly-Baudin, I can remember, and we're like I say, 100 feet or so above the ground. There was Neuilly-Baudin in the background, and a woman tending her rice fields with a rake or something. Very vivid memory. And that was probably only about 5 minutes or so, no more than that, probably into the flight.
Was that kind of the surreal thing that, I'm in this helicopter that just got shot at, I've got a significant wound, but for
Yeah.
this woman in her rice field, life is just carrying on, just normal life.
So a very good friend of mine who was also a helicopter pilot and who I worked with later in my career as an EMS pilot uh, flew in the same area. And so this past winter, January, we were talking and I was describing that to him. Well, he's a painter.
What is it about that scene that makes this such a strong memory for you? Was it just kind of the surreal nature of it? Just
Yeah, I think
this
so.
this woman's just carrying on with life in her rice field, and I've just had my job blown off. And
Yeah, yeah. It's just, and well, and it's plus it's just my last visual memory of flying in Vietnam.
describe the helo hits the ground, or the helo
Yep.
lands, and what
Yeah. The Quonset hut, typical Quonset hut field hospital. It's called the 45th Surgical Field Hospital. And so we land, and I can see over near the entrance there were these two fellows there with the typical canvas army litter. And I can remember doing this to them. And they come over there, and I opened up the canopy, climbed out of my own. They tried to make me lay down, and I still had my helmet on. And I said, no way, So I sat there in the middle of the cot, kind of cross-legged Indian style, sitting as they as we went into the hospital. I'm not sure at what point I got the first shot of morphine, but probably pretty quick. But the first thing I can remember very vividly is this. I don't know if he was a doctor or just not just, but a very good medic. He had his long red rubber hose with a little metal thing on one end. It kind of looked like about a 9/16 inch socket. Uh, and and I'm sitting on the table with my feet hanging over, and he says, "This is this is the first thing we really got to do." He says, "I got to put this up your nose and down in your lungs." He says, "This is going to make it or break it." He says, "It's got to be done. It's going to be very uncomfortable." He said, "Just bear with me." And it went in just smooth as all get out, no problems whatsoever. So then they were able to lay me down because I could breathe and kind of bandage me up, a bit. And I do remember they asked, typical clipboard, legal pad, all my information. I remember writing all that down. And I remember asking where my buddy went. And anyway, they said he flew off. So they never, Dick never shut the aircraft in. And so imagine I was there less than an hour. And then another Huey came in. I remember they said they were going to send a doc with me, but the medic. And the aircraft landed. I don't know where it had been, but there was a number of litters on it with, wounded on board already. And we flew then to Kuchi. And then at Kuchi, we changed aircraft. And then from that one, the medic stayed with me. And we went then all the way to 24th of Deck and Longden, where I ended up spending 2 weeks. And then I can remember, so I got into triage, clipboard again, all the same questions again. But in some respect, that's good. It keeps you focused, I guess. And so at some point, I don't know how long it was, but I ended up going to surgery. My guess is now it's probably maybe mid-afternoon. And so I'm in surgery, and I remember the doctor, Dr. Yost, Thomas Yost, or Jost, Jost. And he said, well, first thing, we're going to put you to sleep and we're going to give you a trach. And he said, but before I do that, he said, I would like to take some pictures and I want your permission. So clipboard again. And I said, okay, as long as I get a copy.
Wow.
And so I woke up in the middle of the night in the maxillofacial ward. I believe it was 9 hours of sewing me up. And so that was the Sunday morning. And later that day, half a dozen buddies flew down. Company commander, battalion commander. And anyway, so it was good seeing all those folks. And then that afternoon, I wrote a letter to my folks. I never fully understood I guess they got notification I was wounded before they got the letter, but I guess the letter helped a lot. Later on that week, one of my best buddies still today, the guy I did the emergency landing with, he was on R&R in Hawaii at the time. So he then got hold of an aircraft. I don't know how, if he flew it himself or got a ride, and came down, spent an afternoon with me. And then on Wednesday, they took me back to surgery and gave me a gastrostomy tube, which I ended up having for 2 years. And it was really weird with the NG tube, watching orange juice going down that clear tube and into your nose and your mouth, just going.
Yes. So what? It's a gastrostomy tube.
Yeah, it goes. right in your belly here. I still got the little dimple here where it goes straight into your stomach. And there's a tube. It was about yay long, and I would keep it taped here with paper
And,
surgical.
and, and that's how
And
you
then
ate for,
that's how I ate for, well, that's how I ate for the first 3 weeks. And then after that, that's how I ate after all my surgeries, my mouth surgeries. Uh, so I would, it was called a bulldog clamp. So I'd clamp the tube shut, and then I would take it loose, and it's 50 cc syringes. So usually about anywhere from 5 to 6, 7 at the most, 50 cc syringes of whatever stuff they were giving me. I was full. You'd be surprised how many people over the years had asked me, well, can you taste it?
uh, I'm guessing the answer is no.
Yeah, right.
Um, how long was it before you were able to really communicate?
Um, Actually, I don't know for sure, but I think I was able to somehow, well, then with the trach. So while I was still at the hospital there in Vietnam, one of the medics, and I think it was a nurse, he taught me how to take a Q-tip, break it off. So it was only, we'll start with the long one, and then take half-inch paper tape. So there's an inner removable cannula to the Jackson trach. So you take that out, then you would wrap half-inch paper tape around the end of the Q-tip until it was a plug fit in that inner cannula. Then break it off so there's just a little tip of the Q-tip sticking out. Then put it back in, and I could talk because then the air was coming through my mouth, I suppose, going in and out of the trach.
Yeah,
So I was able to communicate, I think, in I don't know, in a matter of days anyway. I don't know how easy it was for people to understand what I was saying.
yeah.
Um, uh, so then after 2 weeks, um, to the day, on Saturday, um, I was given brand new fatigues, brand new jungle boots. I had my bag, big duffel bag, and I was told to go out and stand in front of the entrance to the hospital, um, which is right next door where the unit church was, and wait for a bus. I still today have a hard time believing that I was out there by myself, but I have a memory of no one else accompanying me. I have a memory of looking across in this open field, watching Mama Son burn shit in one of those 55-gallon things. And it's the last photo I took in Vietnam.
That's
Well, I
amazing.
took one more as I was going into the triage area at Poncenet. Um, and eventually this bus, they told me the bus was going to be coming from the 93rd, which is another hospital that's also in Long Bend.
Mhm.
And we went, and I went to Benoit. We all got on a 130 and we flew to Townsend, which can't be 20 minutes in the air at most. Uh, and then as we were going through triage, typically they take your blood pressure and take your temperature, all that kind of stuff. Next thing I knew, my brand new jungle boots, my fatigues, they're all gone, and I'm back in blue pajamas. Evidently, I had an infection.
Wow.
And now they tell me I'm not going back to the States, I'm going to Japan. So I
Mm.
ended up going to Japan for 2 weeks.